place. And they said, we will take care of that.
Treasury officials were confident the fallout from the collapse of Lehman would be containable. News of the impending bankruptcy had already reached London. There will be no money coming from New York for the bank to open for business the following morning.
So it was absolutely clear the advice was Lehman UK had to file. It was insolvent. It was not going to be in a position to pay its debts as they fell due. So that reality had to be grasped. And there were polar reactions to that. There were the lawyers and the accountants who turned their minds to the practical challenge that now had to be met of organising the filing and thereafter dealing with the consequences of it. And then there were the commercial managers, traders and so on, who just couldn't believe that this was going to happen and couldn't focus immediately on what the consequences of that might be for the business or for themselves. They were just completely stunned by it.
As an open-air performance of Offenbach started in Brooklyn, across the water at the Fed, it was all but over.
We were basically told to get out. As we were going down to the garage, we were standing in the elevator and said, I don't think they like us. They basically threw us out. And it's a very serious situation. It was a very somber, sad voyage, if you want to call it that, going back to Lehman. As we approached the Lehman building, it was like pandemonium on 7th Avenue. And I remember there was an odd-looking man there, sort of with a spear, saying, "Down with Wall Street." And I said, well, this is going to be some evening.
We await word on the fate of the 158-year-old firm Lehman Brothers.
We are a minute from midnight in terms of outright catastrophe. We're a heartbeat away from a depression.
Dick Fuld was waiting for them up on the 31st floor.
When we went into the boardroom, you could tell without a lot of deep thought that Dick Fuld was very concerned, very worried, and I would say very depressed.
Dick asked me, "Are you telling me it is over?" And I said, "Yes, Dick. I have nowhere else to go. I am out of options. I can't think of anything else to do." He said something like, "Well, we really gave it every effort. I still can't believe it."
I saw a man sitting there sort of saying to himself, I don't understand how this happened. Where did we go wrong?
Behind closed doors, a final throw of the dice. It so happened that a second cousin of President Bush worked at Lehman Brothers. Could the commander-in-chief succeed where central bankers had failed? What took place remains a matter of dispute. Larry McDonald was told about it by colleagues who were there, although the story is denied by George Walker.
They've tried everything, and they kind of all gathered around George. There was some hope that, that he would reach out to the president, and in essence we would go around Hank Paulson and give our message of potential worldwide financial destruction that Lehman would cause directly to the president. You know, the president is his cousin, but to reach out to the White House under duress is a very stressing situation for everybody. He was in a sweat, and finally he agreed to make that call to the White House. The operator put him on hold, which to the people in the room seemed just like an eternity. And as the seconds ticked by, everybody was, more intense. Everybody's pulses and heartbeats were racing a little bit more intently. And finally, the operator came back to the line. And she said, "I'm sorry, the president cannot take your call at this time." There was just a real horrific, blood-curdling feeling in the room of potential destruction and despair.
Dick Fuld and the board of directors had one last task to perform: pass the resolution winding up the bank.
It was dark out, very dark out. And Dick Fuld looked up, clearly a man that was in turmoil, and he looked up and he said, "I guess this is goodbye."
After 42 years at Lehman Brothers, Dick Fuld was out of a job. At their peak, Lehman shares were worth $85 each. They were now worth 3 cents. Finally, in the middle of the night, the bankruptcy lawyers had completed the preparations. They were ready to file the petition.
It's like sending an email. So at 2 a.m. when that started, most of us were drained of emotion. And yes, we filed it. It was the end of a institution which was one of the originators of Wall Street. And here it was all coming to an end by pressing a button on a computer. Sad in many respects.
Wall Street has seen very, very few days like this. The mortgage crisis has now taken down Lehman Brothers right behind.
Expected it, and there were others who were just simply devastated. Lehman Brothers suffering a spectacular downfall. It's stock.
Lehman Brothers رابع أكبر بنوك الأقراض الأمريكية.
150 Jahre alte Lehman Brothers ist
Бедные братья Лиман.
Américaine Lehman Brothers a annoncé que elle allait se déclarer faillite.
Lehman Brothers
This is really stupendous. This has happened.
When it collapsed on the Sunday night, that did send shockwaves throughout the world because people thought, well, if they can go down, who else can go down?
Lehman Brothers was the largest bankruptcy in history, 10 times bigger than Enron. The impact of the bankruptcy around the world was unparalleled. Lehman's web of global transactions were hugely complicated, and few really understood them. So with the banking world already jumpy, panic spread as institutions feared how exposed they might be.
Lehman's illustrated this huge problem. The level of impaired assets or bad loans in the system was so high that even recognized institutions in America were being put at risk. And secondly, that Lehman's was entangled in such a complex way with other institutions that whatever happened to one institution was bound to have an effect on the other. So Lehman's was a seminal moment in the sense that it illustrated these two big problems that if we didn't solve, things would get a huge amount worse.
5,000 staff worked at Lehman's European HQ in London. When they arrived that morning, many discovered they were out of a job.
It was like a scene of a bombing and a family bereavement all rolled into one. When I went up to the management floor, everybody was sitting around with their heads literally in their hands. A lot of them had red eyes and black bags under them. Had been there all weekend and all night. And I was told there'd been a meeting of staff suddenly convened that morning in which the head of the European operation had said, "It's all over, go home."
Some people just burst into tears and just didn't know how to cope with it. Other people were on the phone to the headhunters straight away. And you kind of had the best and the worst of human instinct raise its head, as these situations tend to. You know, there were certainly people who felt they were on the lifeboat, they had something sorted out for themselves, but they weren't going to let anybody else on that lifeboat. You know, they're going to sail off and leave you and sort yourselves out.
This is a CNBC special report, the fall of Lehman Brothers.
Over this seismic story, a historic day.
As the start of